So we're going to come up to the mic right now with Michelle Martin, and the title of her story is Death Defying Limestone Dive.
All right, hi. And seriously, put your name in the bucket. So I did not even know this was happening until Monday. When I checked my email after I got home from work, had a beer before I ate dinner, and thought, what? Story Slam? Sure. And came up with a vague idea, and now, here I am. So, I'd like to blame the beer and listening to the moth a whole lot, but really, I have a whole history of just kind of acting and then worrying about the consequences. So, which brings me to the story. So this takes place when I was about 12 years old, so 40 plus a little bit years ago. You can do the math. But I did most of my growing up, my running around childhood experience in the late 70s and the early 80s. So parents at that point, there weren't helicopter parents, it was just not a thing. Everyone just ran around, it was the come home when the street lights come on kind of childhood. And I was also what therapists would have called an adultified child by virtue of having been the oldest in a home impacted by alcoholism. So I was dealing with a lot of stuff a lot younger than kids really should. So I always had this sense of being big, being free, and just being able to do whatever the heck I want. And then we're going to add on top of that the fact that I had undiagnosed ADHD. So me and impulse control were not real tight. And I just had this sense of being invincible and able to do darn near anything my whole childhood. So in about 4th grade, though, I met my then best friend, Eileen McGregor. And she and I were those friends that just become so tight, they're practically family. If I wasn't at her house, she was over at my house, vice versa. Or we were scrambling down, we grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and we would be scrambling down. I remember them as cliffs. They were probably more like steep hillsides, but down into the Cleveland metro parks. And my faithful dog Whiskey, told you alcoholism, my faithful dog Whiskey was always with us, and we'd just be splashing around in the Rocky River, climbing up and down these shale cliffs, probably more like hillsides, just running around unsupervised and doing whatever the heck we want. But since Eileen and I became practically family, we would sometimes go on each other's family trips in the summer. There was one year Eileen came with me and my family down to Florida to visit my grandma. We went to Disney together. But really, my favorite trip that I ever got to do with Eileen's family was spending a day out at Kelly's Island in Lake Erie. So it's a little like the Apostle Islands. None of them are very big. Kelly's Island is about 4 square miles, so none of the adults really had to worry about you getting very lost. It's also a place you don't got to worry about traffic because very few people actually bring a car. So most of the traffic out there was bicycles and golf carts that you could rent. And 12-year-old me loved driving those golf carts. That was a lot of fun. So it was really a wonderful place for kids to be able to just run around pretty much unsupervised. So a lot of it's still wooded. And so there's me and Eileen biking around the island, just having a grand time looking at the woods. We've got wonderful views of Lake Erie. And after a little while, we can hear the sound, unmistakable sound, of other unsupervised kids. So of course, we bike right over to that, and we come around the bend, and we see a group of kids about our age. And the next thing we can see is this huge limestone quarry that is full of water. I mean, it looks like it's its own lake before you get to Lake Erie, because Kelly's Island had been mined for a whole lot of limestone way back in the day. So there's still 2 very large quarries, and they tend to fill up with water. So we came over to check out what these kids were doing, and it turns out they're getting ready to jump from where they are up at the top of this cliff that's overlooking the quarry to jump into the water below. And we're like, okay, that sounds fun. And we're all there, kind of 12 years old-ish, trying to psych ourselves into it. And yeah, I'm the kind of kid who, like I said, I would act before I would really think about it, but if I had time to think about it, it was really bad. I was that kid that would chicken out on the high dive because I'd have time to stand there and look down and see just how far it was. And more than once, I would climb back down that ladder, tail between my legs, not jumping off that high dive. But for some reason that day, I did not want to look afraid in front of these other kids. So we're all looking down there, and it's a pretty good, in my mind, it's huge. It's maybe 50 feet down to the water. in reality, it was probably closer to 20, but 40 years and being 12 years old gives you some time to exaggerate. So what I do remember very vividly though was before you jumped, you couldn't just like jump off. You had to take a running start because at the bottom of that quarry, the wall of the quarry, there was a ledge out in the water. And it was very, very shallow. The water was really shallow with that ledge, so you had to clear that, or you were going to hit that ledge and break your leg. And so there I go. I was like, all right, we're going to do this. And I backed up, and I got myself a good running start, and I just went for it, and I leaped, and somehow, feeling just my own sense of invulnerability, made it, cleared the ledge, obviously, did not break my leg and drown. And I don't know how many times that afternoon I wound up repeating the process. It was about, you had to climb back up the side of the limestone to get back up there, but I know I did it multiple times. But I will never forget that first time, launching myself out into midair, my skinny limbs flailing all around me, screaming at the top of my lungs, feeling invincible.
Give it up for Michelle!
Woo!